Emile carrying on. Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Thus a newborn child requires a nurse who has recently become mother. There is, I know, difficulty here. But as soon as we leave the path of nature, there are difficulties in the way of all well-doing. The wrong course is the only right one under the circumstances, so we take it. The nurse must be healthy alike in disposition and in body. The violence of the passions as well as the humors may spoil her milk. Moreover, to consider the body only is to keep only half our aim in view. The milk may be good and the nurse bad. A good character is as necessary as a good constitution. If you choose a vicious person, I do not say her foster child will acquire her vices, but he will suffer for them. Ought she not to bestow on him day by day, along with the milk, a care which calls for zeal, patience, gentleness, and cleanliness? If she is intemperate and greedy, her milk will soon be spoilt. If she is careless and hasty, what will become of the poor little wretch left to her mercy and unable to either to protect himself or to complain? The wicked are never good for anything. The choice is all the more important because her foster child should have no other guardian, just as he should have no teacher but his tutor. This was the custom of the ancients, who talked less but acted more wisely than we. The nurse never left her foster daughter. This is why the nurse is the confidant in most of their plays. A child who passes through many hands in turn can never be well brought up. At every change he makes a secret comparison, which continually tends to lessen his respect for those who control him, and with it their authority over him. If once he thinks there are grown-up people with no more sense than children, the authority of age is destroyed, and his education is ruined. A child should know betters, but its father and mother are found in its foster mother and its tutor, and even this is one too many, but this division is inevitable, and the best that can be done in the way of remedy is that the man and woman who control him shall be so well agreed with regard to him that they seem like one. The nurse must live rather more comfortably, she must have rather more substantial food, but her whole way of living must not be altered, for a sudden change, even a change for the better, is dangerous to health, and since her usual way of life has made her healthy and strong, why change it? Country women eat less meat and more vegetables than townswomen, and this vegetarian diet seems favorable rather than otherwise to themselves and their children. When they take nurslings from the upper classes, they eat meat and broth with the idea that they will form better child and supply more milk. I do not hold with this at all, and experience is on my side, for we do not find children fed in this way less liable to colic and worms. That need not surprise us, for decaying animal matter swarms with worms, but this is not the case with vegetable matter. Footnote: women eat bread, vegetables, and dairy produce. Female dogs and cats do the same. The she-wolves eat grass. This supplies vegetable juices to their milk. There are still those species which are unable to anything but flesh, if such there are, which I very much doubt. Milk, although manufactured in the body of an animal, is a vegetable substance. This is shown by analysis. It readily turns acid, and far from showing traces of any volatile alkali, like animal matter, it gives a neutral salt, like plants. The milk of herbivore creatures is sweeter and more wholesome than the milk of the carnivorous. Formed of a substance similar for its own, it keeps its goodness and becomes less liable to putrefaction. The milk of herbivorous creatures is sweeter and more wholesome than the milk of the carnivorous. So I guess cow's milk is better than wolf's milk, or tiger's milk, or lion's milk. If quantity is considered, it is well known that farinaceous foods produce more blood than meat, and so they ought to yield more milk. If the child were not weaned too soon, and if it were fed on vegetarian food, and his foster mother were a vegetarian, I do not think it would be troubled with worms. Milk derived from vegetable foods may perhaps be more liable to go sour, but I am far from considering sour milk an unwholesome food. Whole nations have no other food and are none the worse, and all the array of absorbents seem to me mere humbug. There are constitutions which do not thrive on milk, others can take it without absorbents. People are afraid of the milk separating or curdling. That's absurd, for we know that milk always curdles in the stomach. This is how it becomes sufficiently solid to nourish children and young animals. If they do not curdle, it will merely pass away without feeding them. Footnote, although the juices which nourish us are liquid, they must be extracted from solids. A hard-working man who ate nothing but soup would soon waste away. He would be far better fed on milk just because it curdles. In vain we dilute milk and use absorbents. Whoever swallows milk digests cheese. This rule is without exception. Rennet is made from a calf's stomach. Instead of changing the nurse's usual diet, I think it would be enough to give food in larger quantities and better of its kind. It is not the nature of the food that makes a vegetable diet indigestible, but the flavor that makes it unwholesome. Reform your cookery. Use neither butter nor oil for frying. Butter, salt, and milk should never be cooked. Let your vegetables be cooked in water and only seasoned when they come to table. The vegetable diet, far from disturbing the nurse, will give her a plentiful supply of milk. Footnote, those who wish to study a full account of the advantages and disadvantages of the Pythagorean regime may consult the works of Dr. Cauchy and his opponent, Dr. Bianchi, on this important subject. If the vegetable diet is best for the child, how can meat food be best for his nurse? The things are contradictory. Fresh air affects children's constitutions, particularly in early years. It enters every pore of a soft and tender skin. It has a powerful effect on their young bodies. Its effects can never be destroyed. So I should not agree with those who take a country woman from her village and shut her up in one room in a town and her nursing with her. I would rather send him to breathe the fresh air of the country than the foul air of the town. He will take his new mother's position, will live in her cottage where her tutor will follow him. The reader will bear in mind that this tutor is not a paid servant, but the father's friend. But if this friend cannot be found, if this transfer is not easy, if none of my advice can be followed, you will say to me, what shall I do instead? I've already told you already. Do what you're doing. No advice is needed there. Men are not made to be crowded together in ant hills, but scattered over the hill to till it. Men are not made to be crowded together in ant hills, but scattered over the earth to till it. The more they are massed together, the more corrupt they become. Disease and vice are the sure results of overcrowded cities. Of all creatures, man is least fitted to live in herds. Huddled together like sheep, men would very soon die. Man's breath is fatal to his fellows. This is literally as well as figuratively true. Men are devoured by our own towns. In a few generations, the race dies out and becomes degenerate. It needs renewal, and it is always renewed from the country. Send your children to renew themselves, so to speak. Send them to regain in the open fields the strength lost in the foul air of our crowded cities. Women hurry home that their children may be born in the town. They ought to do just the opposite, especially those who mean to nurse their own children. They would lose less than they think, and in more natural surroundings, the pleasures associated by nature with maternal duties would soon destroy the taste for other delights. The newborn infant is soon bathed in warm water, to which a little wine is usually added. I think the wine might be dispensed with. As nature does not produce fermented liquors, it is not likely that they are of much value to her creatures. In the same way, it is unnecessary to take the precaution of heating the water. In fact, among many races, the newborn infants are bathed with no more ado in rivers or in the sea. Our children, made tender before birth by the softness of their parents, come into the world with a constitution already enfeebled, which cannot be at once exposed to all the trials required to restore it to health. Little by little, they must be restored to the natural vigor. Begin then by following this custom and leave it off gradually. Wash your children often. Their dirty ways show the need of this. If they are only white, their skin is injured. But as they grow stronger, gradually reduce the heat of the water till at last you bathe them winter and summer and cold, even in ice-cold water. So Jean-Jacques says, bathe your kids in ice-cold water to get, their skin strong. To avoid risk, this change must be slow and gradual and imperceptible, so you may use a thermometer for exact measurements. This habit of the bath, once established, should never be broken off. It must be kept up all through life. I value it not only on the grounds of cleanliness and present health, but also as a wholesome means of making the muscles supple and accustoming them to bear without risk or effort extremes of heat and cold. As he gets older, I will have the child trained to bathe occasionally in hot water, a very bearable degree, and often every degree of cold water. Now, water being a denser fluid touches us at more points in air, so that Having learnt to bear all the variations of temperature and water, we shall scarcely feel this of the air. Footnote, children in towns are stifled by being kept indoors and too much wrapped up. Those who control them have still to learn that fresh air, far from doing them harm, will make them strong, while hot air will make them weak, will give rise to fevers, and will eventually kill them. So fresh air, cold fresh air is better than hot air. When the child draws its first breath, do not confine it in tight wrappings. No cap, no bandages, nor swaddling clothing. Loose and flowing flannel wrappers which leave its limbs free and are not too heavy to check his movements, not too warm to prevent his feeling the air. Footnote, I say cradle using the common word for want of a better, though I'm convinced that it is never necessary and often harmful to rock children in the cradle. Put him in a big cradle, well padded, where he can move easily and safely. As he begins to grow stronger, let him crawl about the room. Let him develop and stretch his tiny limbs. You will see him gain strength from day to day. Compare him with a well-swaddled child of the same age, and you'll be surprised at their different rates of progress. Footnote, the ancient Peruvians wrapped their children in loose swaddling bands, leaving the arms quite free. Later they placed them unswaddled in a hole in the ground lined with cloth so that the lower part of the body was in the hole, and their arms were free, and they could move the head and bend the body at will without falling or hurting themselves. When they began to walk, they were enticed to come to the breast. The little Negroes are often in a position much more difficult for sucking. They cling to their mother's hip and cling so tightly that the mother's arm is often not needed to support them. They clasp the breast with their hand and continue sucking while their mother goes on with her ordinary work. These children begin to walk at 2 months rather than to crawl. Later on, they can run on all fours, almost as well as on their feet. Buffon. In Buffon might have also quoted the example of England, where the senseless and barbarous swaddling clothes have become almost obsolete. You must expect great opposition from the nurses who find a half-strangled baby needs much less watching. Besides, his dirtiness is more perceptible in open garments. He must be attended to more frequently. Indeed, custom is an unanswerable argument in some lands and among all classes of people. Do not argue with the nurses. Give your orders, see them carried out, and spare no pains to make the attention you prescribe easy in practice. Why not take your share in it? With ordinary nursings, where the body alone is thought of, nothing matters so long as the child lives and does not actually die. But with us, when education begins with life, the newborn child is already a disciple, not of his tutor, but of nature. The tutor merely studies under this master and sees that his orders are not evaded. He watches over the infant, he observes it, he looks for the first feeble glimmering of intelligence, as the Moslem looks for the moment of the moon's rising in her first quarter. We are born capable of learning, but knowing nothing, perceiving nothing. The mind, bound up with imperfect and half-grown organs, is not even aware of its own existence. The movements and cries of the newborn child are purely reflex, without knowledge or will. Suppose a child born with the size and strength of manhood, entering upon life full-grown like Pallas was the brain from the brain of Jupiter. Such a child, man, would be a perfect idiot, an automaton, a statue without motion, almost without feeling. He would see and hear nothing. He would recognize no one. He could not turn his eyes towards what he wanted to see. Not only would he perceive no external object, he would not even be aware of sensations through the several sense organs. His eye would not perceive color, his ear sounds, his body would be unaware of contact with neighboring bodies. He would not even know he had a body. What his hands handled would be in his brain alone. All his sensations would be united in one place. They would exist only in the common sensorium. He would have only one idea, that of self, to which he would refer all his sensations. And this idea, rather this feeling, would be the only thing in which he excelled as an ordinary child. This man, full-grown at birth, would also be unable to stand on his own feet. He would need a long time to learn how to keep his balance. Perhaps he would not even be able to try to do it. You would see the big, strong body left in one place like a stone, or creeping and crawling like a young puppy. He would feel the discomfort of bodily needs without knowing what was the matter, without knowing how to provide for these needs. There is no immediate connection between the muscles of the stomach and those of the arms and legs to make him take a step towards food or stretch a hand to seize it, even where he's surrounded with it. And as his body would be full grown and his limbs well developed, he would be without the perpetual restlessness and movement of childhood, so he might die of hunger without stirring to seek food. However little you may have thought about the order and development of our knowledge, you cannot deny that such a one would be in a state of almost primitive ignorance and stupidity natural to man before he has learned anything from experience or from his fellows. So, this is Jean-Jacques Rousseau just kind of going, more in depth. Something I wanted to mention before, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, he breaks Plato's, whole monopoly on education. After he breaks Plato, Thomas Hobbes, which is a thinker of Leviathan, he read Jean-Jacques Rousseau straight through. He picked up Jean-Jacques Rousseau's Emile and read the whole thing straight through. So Thomas Hobbes liked what Jean-Jacques Rousseau had to say.